Let's get started. I'll make the introductions to our wonderful panelists. So we've got Elizabeth Cowper, who is the founder of the Ludo Partnership, which is a consultancy which is providing coaching, HR support, and well-being guidance to businesses. And she's also the founder of the WOMO, a tech platform, which is launching next week, I believe, which supports working mothers. And in the past, she was the VP of HR at Tapestry, which is the business that owns Coach, Kate Spade, amongst others. And she was also the global head of Wellbeing there as well. Then we have Laura Moore, who is the founder and CEO of Nell Health. And this is a business which offers genetic testing to provide actionable and sort of highly personalized insights in terms of what you should be eating and how you should be exercising. And they have nutritionists, they have video consultations, obviously genetic testing, as I said. And Laura has also a wealth of experience from Unilever, L'Oreal, and she also set up her first startup at the age of 19. So serial entrepreneur here. And then we have David Plans, and he's the co-founder of BioBeats, which has just recently been acquired by Huma. It's an AI startup, and it looks at how to prevent mental health issues. It's a platform which is designed to improve employee mental well-being. And they also actually offer highly personalized insights. And the way that, well, I hope David will explain a little bit more, but the way they do that is by having sort of mood journaling, as well as some biosensors, which can provide data such as heart rate and so on. So, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Maria Vorostovsky. I'm the founder and CEO of HVO Search. We are an executive search firm, and we work at the intersection of creative, retail, and digital. We work internationally. Our clients are based all throughout Europe. We tend to work at sort of director, VP level across mostly commercial and digital roles. So, if you're looking to build leadership teams within the space, then do get in touch with us. So yes, just to, get started in terms of, what we're going to be talking about today. And, we're talking about wellness at work, which is extremely close to my heart. I think it's a really, really important topic. I think it's something, as I said earlier, we're just scratching the surface in terms of looking at it from a work perspective, and I'm glad that there's more conversations are being had about it. So obviously the impact of COVID has had a huge impact on our mental and physical health. It's been, quite dramatic, and we're feeling it both kind of, our health has been threatened, and we're feeling that mentally and emotionally also. So, as we adjust to working remotely, issues such as loneliness, isolation, they creep in, as well as, anxiety and stress, which is as a result of fear and uncertainty. I mean, we already know that in our modern way of working, that we are extremely stressed. I mean, according to the American Institute of Stress, 94% of American workforce experience stress in the workplace, and this was 2019 results. I know we're talking about the US, but also in the UK, particularly during lockdown, the percentage of married people or those in civil partnerships have also reported an increased amount of stress. I think it was 39% during lockdown as opposed to 20%. So not only, our people, which is our biggest asset, are feeling under stress, which is very alarming, but our relationships are also under threat as well, which in my view is one of the most key, essential part of us being human. So, as I said, I'm really glad that these conversations are being started, and, we are towards some way of destigmatizing some of the mental health issues in particular. But, as we say, we need more than kind of playful offices, snacks and fruit in the office and subsidized gym membership. And I'm hoping that with this conversation, we're contributing a little bit towards that conversation. So, we know that when we're happier, we're healthier, less stressed, we're better employees, we're better leaders, and we take less time off work, which means that we're costing less to the company. So it's extremely important to our communities. So I'd like to address these issues today. And so I've got, three fantastic speakers, and we're going to be looking at each of their own perspectives and talk about the impact of the crisis on our health and mental health, ways to invest into this at work, and look at key priorities for 2021 and beyond. So again, thank you so much to our panelists being here. And Elizabeth, I suppose I wanted, I was actually thinking about it today, and I know in the title we've got kind of wellness at work, but also talking about well-being, and I kind of use them interchangeably. Would you, what's the difference?
Well-being is very much use the word of how we feel within ourselves. I think we talk about our own well-being, but then it's interchanged. It is, as you say, with wellness at work or well-being at work. It's just, it's the language people use, but people tend to talk about well-being within themselves more than my wellness. But you're right, the two words are very interchangeable.
Okay, well, just wanted to kind of clarify that. But why is this important? What about it that why do we need to pay attention to it? What's the purpose of this?
On a personal basis, having a good sense of well-being absolutely makes us feel happier and more content inside. And there's a huge amount of research that backs that up. When people feel they can really be happy inside and be their authentic selves, the knock-on benefit to employers is that there's greater productivity, a reduction in staff turnover, there's better morale, they report less stress in their teams. So the impact of the business, of course, is going to benefit the productivity of that company, but that's really coming from the productivity of an individual. An individual who is feeling a much better sense of well-being and feeling happier at work will be more productive, which in turn also drives a feeling of success and accomplishment. So it's a sort of self-prophesizing cycle that benefits both the individual and the company. That's why it's important for organizations.
And obviously, our kind of health has been threatened, obviously, as a result of the pandemic, and also us working remotely. What have you seen as the impact of this flexible working on our well-being or wellness?
It's been a real mix, and there's been various reports written. I think it's almost too soon for us to tell the real long-term impact. I think we're in a place where most people, and I certainly can speak for my own opinion, feel that we will never go back to the old ways of everybody in the office 5 days a week. We are evolving into a completely new way of working. The impact on people has been mixed. The chap, what's his name? Andy Haldane, who's the chief economist and executive director of the Bank of England, spoke recently, actually. He did a really interesting speech where he talked about how the shift to how we work is really moving. And he said for some people, having that commuter time back has been amazing for them because they've been able to do more with their time. But the research also demonstrates a third of those people are using that time to work more. So some people have taken more time back for them. Some people seem to be working more during that time. And how people have responded is in many ways an individual response. But that knocks onto that question of, well, what are we as employers doing about it to make sure we're looking after people through this monumental seismic change? And it is seismic. I also think we've had differences in how the home environment is set up. So if you live on your own and you're working from home, where's your connection? And we know how important that is. If you're living in a family and you've got children, how are you managing that? So everybody's personal circumstances also impact this, this sense of wellness now we're all working from home. And then let's not forget, there are huge parts of our population who haven't been able to have that. And those frontline workers, think about the police force or those that work in supermarkets, have got a completely different sort of stress going on where they can't have that. So we've got pressure in all areas.
I think it is important to state that not everyone's experiencing this in the same way. And you're right, we can be a little bit blinkered in some ways, just thinking, well, because now we're working from home and maybe we can, do some yoga at our lunch spot. Doesn't mean that everyone else is having that opportunity. And depending on your line of work, you're being faced with completely different challenges.
Absolutely.
Just talking about your kind of experience with Tapestry. I mean, what kind of, and obviously this is, not necessarily kind of COVID related, but what kind of wellness initiatives that you thought that, what kind of things were you working on and what was successful?
We started on a shoestring. When you start out, sometimes there isn't an automatic handing over of a budget, but this was a while back. I hope and think things are changing a little bit. But we started out doing events or sort of sessions in the office. So we'd have somebody come in and do a guided mindfulness session. We'd have somebody come in and do a skincare consultation. We had access to a personal trainer that came in. So a real different mix of things. And I learned early on, and this is one of the things I talk to my clients about now, is before you start any of that, what's important is conducting a needs analysis for your employees. Because I speak on the subject and talk to companies about this, and one of the biggest errors that companies make is they slap in what they perceive to be a well-being strategy with well-being ideas, and it doesn't land well, and it's not what the employees want. And every company's different. So conducting a really thorough needs analysis is the first step. So before you do anything, that is the most important thing. And so we had some initiatives at Tapestry, and then we stepped into really talking to our people about what they want. Now, this is a really blatant example that I use when I talk to clients, but you can go and put a pool table in and then find nobody plays on it. I mean, that's a really crude example, but actually, what do people really want? And I think we've had a problem in the past where companies might have said, well, we do gym membership discount, we do well-being. No, that isn't well-being. What do your people want? So we did that, and we had some really interesting ideas come back from our people. We ran things like art workshops, and you might say, well, what's that got to do with well-being? It takes people away from their desk, it encourages creativity, and it makes connections. Because just by sitting there and doing that together for an hour or an hour and a half away from their desk, they're talking to other departments. So that's helping with cross-pollination of cross-collaboration between teams. They're using a completely different part of their brain to be creative, and they are just away from that day-to-day stress of their desk. So well-being can come in multiple different guises.
I love that. Sorry to interrupt you. Like, I love that. It's almost, I have my own opinion about it, but it's almost like, we're so focused on productivity that we actually forget that we also need to be able to be completely balanced. And when you're focused on one thing so much, that you need to kind of take a break from it in order to come back. And this element of kind of fun and, not having necessarily a goal, that you just kind of like there, you're present. I think that makes so much sense, that the reason that works. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine. So we ran different things. We ran a couple of things a month, a couple of sessions on different subjects. We invited our employees to come forward and ask for things. And then we ran a wellness week once a year, which was a dedicated week where the entire week was dedicated to wellbeing. And there were multiple things going on every day. And that was a real launch pad, I suppose, to get people in that perhaps hadn't been coming along to something else, and just really encourage them to come across. And that had to be led from leadership. We talked to line managers and said, have you booked on something in Wellness Week? Please go and do it. So that we really made sure that authentically it was coming from the top. There was permission for it, which sounds ridiculous, but you do need to do that and have leaders say to people, you've been really busy. I need you now to go and take part in this event. And that was a completely fun week that was fully immersive. And keep in mind that Tapestry is a retailer. So 82% of our population were not sat in an office. So what do you do then? How do you bring wellness to people who work on the shop floor? And Wellness Week was a really good chance for us to do that, to have briefings to the managers in the morning, pre-recorded mindfulness sessions that they could use on we had sort of in-house communication system. They could download and listen to it in their own time. So there were multiple ways in which we took what we were doing at corporate into our stores. And that was a really huge challenge, but it was fantastic. It really, really paid off.
And what kind of results did you see? I know we're talking about, obviously it's not necessarily not always easy to measure that, but what did you see as a result of that?
Measuring wellness is a really, we could do a whole nother webinar on that on itself, actually. Yeah, we've got a new subject for the next one now, Maria. But measuring wellness is challenging. Turnover, absolutely. Productivity, absolutely. But a lot of the feedback I had was from line managers saying, I've really noticed this happening in my team. Now, then when you sit in front of the CFO and want to quantify that for more money in the budget next year, how do you do that and what does that look like? When I was able to demonstrate that we had an increase in engagement on our employee engagement survey, and then a store that had high engagement had good uptake on viewing on our internal platform a particular wellness agenda, you can start putting these analytics together and saying, this store's performing well, the sales are good, the engagement was good on this product, we've got lower turnover. And when you can start bringing all those things together, you can really start measuring how successful wellbeing has been in a particular team or in a particular store. And that really worked for me at Tapestry.
I think, especially when you're, trying to convince the business that this is so important without talking about starting on a shoestring, but then obviously having to, justify and saying, well, we need to do more of these because, this is what we're seeing. I mean, I'll come back to you on that because I'm kind of, interested in asking further, but I'd like to address the next question to Laura, just in terms of, her kind of business. I know that, Laura, your business, Nell Health, you've recently opened it up to kind of like direct to consumer. You had an overwhelming response to that. So, congratulations on it. But, from your business, like what are the trends that you're seeing? What are the, what are the, companies, how are they responding to what's happening?
I think, I really resonate with a lot of the things that Elizabeth was saying about how companies increasingly, not just through COVID, but before, we're learning about the benefits financially and the sort of ROI of investing in wellness for the teams. But I think definitely one of the biggest trends that's come out of COVID is that, across the board, individuals and companies, so not forgetting that, companies are made up of human beings as well. Everyone has realized the importance of prioritizing health to allow you to live your best life, to allow you to do your best work, to allow you to, looking after yourself is also about looking after the family around you and the people around you. So I think there's been an enormous amount of prioritization, and there's been a sort of new context put on that as well, about it's not just about me, health is about much broader benefit as well. So definitely individuals, I think, are willing to invest in their own health in ways that are more preventative. So that's one big trend of, actually I realized that it's not something I can take for granted. People do need to understand, what are the steps I personally need to make to be, eating better or exercising, and starting to actually invest that time and seeing a reason. And I think in the same way that corporates have seen, it's always that special thing of having a context about why to do things, and it gives you that motivation. So companies have seen, well, there's my employees now are struggling with mental and physical issues that they perhaps didn't have as clearly before COVID. So now there's a real reason for them to prioritize giving them the tools as well to prioritize their health. And I think having employees being more willing is actually making it a better investment for corporates.
And are you seeing that companies are more likely to invest in the space, or less likely to invest in the space because there's less budgets now as a result?
Well, I think obviously depending on the sector that companies are in, there are definitely sectors that have been hit in a very negative and challenging way from COVID, that are having to make very difficult decisions, not just about wellness budgets, but about across the whole business. But I think it's certainly become an area where companies that can are investing, because with the new remote working that a lot of people are faced with, they're looking for ways to engage their teams and make sure that teams are still okay and can continue to do their jobs. And that's one way that is definitely at the top of priority budgets in companies we've spoken to. But I think they're also more willing to invest in solutions that have a clear return for them. So in budgets, I think wellness has become something that's rather than it being like something we should look at a bit and make sure we've got a few policies. I think it's looking about a more integrated approach and just thinking, well, as an organization, how are we investing to make sure productivity and people's happiness are at the top of the agenda? And I think well-being or wellness, or we had this discussion on our team, actually. We see even different spellings of well-being, so I think that was a really good first question. But no, I think definitely there's a need to sort of integrate that as not just its own area, but actually that's just like part of our budget now, is that we take care of people, and we equip them with tools that maybe we wouldn't have even looked at before, but now we're willing to try. So I think there's definitely there is a much bigger space we found in budgets, but also there's a more innovative approach to looking at newer solutions and not just traditional health screens or things that maybe would have been less measurable as well and just given out without any sort of engagement. So I think it's really positive.
No, that's great. And I think it's certainly it's like what you, in terms of kind of providing that for the wider population, but also not really expecting that individuals take care of themselves, that actually companies can do that on a and actually probably can make a bigger impact, because those who not necessarily that health conscious at least have access or information about it. But going about we're talking about measuring. I mean, how do you measure the effect of how your product is helping businesses?
I think one of the biggest measures is engagement that we see. So as an external supplier, so I think teams inside, we've always found, have got quite different ways of measuring sort of employee wellness. And I again completely agree with Elizabeth about, you know, needs analysis and doing an assessment before you just launch an initiative. It's about engaging your employees before you measure the engagement after. But no, I think definitely seeing uptake of solutions that you offer, how often employees use them. So with solutions that we do, just giving an example, our discovery program is a genetic test that we send to the home, and we then offer consultations and different add-on programs, and budgets can be set on an allocation basis. So we have a really clear view of, you know, from doing a needs analysis before we even send out the invitations to opt into the program, we can see how, you know, what the sort of heat map of the organization is and how people are feeling and what the need is for them to, you know, have more preventative health solutions or well-being solutions, and then afterwards what the usage is. So literally, you know, sending out qualitative surveys and seeing how many people claimed you know, different consultations, or even themselves increased the budget and topped up to have more. So I think engagement is a big thing we're seeing in the industry as a trend. And then ROI, there are so many different conversations about this. So we've seen quite a few studies measuring, you know, right down from, well, we're doing this in an area of preventative health. So, you know, you could even go as far as saying we potentially reduce the risk of your employees getting, you know, things like type 2 diabetes, and you do see companies going into that sort of realm. I think it is a very hard area to measure, and we try and do it based on the data we have. But I think there's a definite, you know, sort of large link between a company's sort of general health, as in how, you know, their retention of staff, sick days claimed, productivity, growth, like all the things that you should care about as a leader. Seeing an ROI in that, I think, should be that, you know, you invest £1 or $1 in America, and a Harvard study we refer to a lot showed that there's, you know, almost a triple investment back. For every $1 you invest, you have $3 back in company growth. So the studies are there if you want to look at it, but I think it's very much about looking at your organization and what, you know, how your teams work, and what the sort of, you know, just measuring what sort of solutions and tools would benefit them the most is really important.
I wonder if there's a positive correlation with companies that, if, you know, even just by the fact of creating a focus on well-being and health and, you know, positivity, is already creating that culture of, you know, togetherness and community, and, you know, we do take care of each other. And actually that already, you know, in itself produces, you know, an effective workforce, versus companies that don't. So I wonder if there's any evidence for that. But
I think, you know, there's been I found it quite hard to keep up with the trends that are going on now, and in terms of sort of how people are feeling globally. There's so many things that I think have changed in everyone's lives, and everyone seems to have had their own experience. That's both business leaders, businesses, and individuals. But you know, I think that there are definite trends, obviously, towards prioritization of, let's say, the things that matter. I think there's been a sort of pause for everyone to think, well, actually, you know, my health and, you know, my own well-being is something I should invest in. Companies thinking the same, but also this kind of, you know, seeing a bigger purpose in things, and you know, seeing your community actually as not just something you take for granted and something that we all need to invest in. And the same with companies, you know, seeing their teams as not just numbers on a board, but actually that is my company. And you know, now that we're not in the office, it's even more obvious that that was something so special that we created. And how do you recreate that around the purpose that the company is trying to build, and try and communicate that, but also still have that sort of feeling of where, you know, we are a community, we're a team, and we care about each other, and we care about what happens and what impact this business has. So I think, you know, purpose and impact, and the kind of prioritization of the self-care that actually is towards a larger purpose, like, you know, protecting other people, and even trends towards how people are trying to, you know, to help in their own way towards stopping the pandemic. So I think, although there have been significant challenges, I do think there are things that we can, you know, with those sort of new contexts that have come in, we could see quite a positive shift, I think, in the way that people view, you know, how important purpose and context are for people.
Well, I think it's amazing that you're in a space that is actually helping with what's happening globally today, and with an amazing mission. One other question in terms of, you know, obviously, you know, with tests and so on, and, you know, how we were operating before, like, how are you adjusting to I guess, companies working remotely and, not necessarily being able to like see people, and, how are you doing that?
Well, I think we've sort of prioritized the solutions we offer that were always actually remote. So I think in that way we were very lucky that we've always tried to make sure that things that we offer were not seen as a company benefit to them, but actually it was something you were very much offering to the individual. So we never shared health data or anything with companies. It was always about, we're going to offer you this tool, and then if somebody opted in, we would send kits to their house, so the individual would be doing the test, they'd receive the results themselves, they didn't even have to use their company email. So I think there's definitely that solution has always been remote, and now we've made sure that things like consultations, and we've invested in the technology behind that to make sure that it's a much nicer process for people to book in with experts and have that sort of follow-on care as well, to make them feel like there's more of a sort of there's a program that's ongoing, not just something that's a one-off, and that's been really important to give people that sort of extra support. But I think it's a challenge actually with more traditional health benefits, and we did biomarker or blood testing last year, and we've it's something that we're finding that we're having to work around a lot of new challenges doing what would have been seen as a more traditional health screen or health assessments. There are clinics that are offering them, but I think anything in person now is more challenging to get people to go to. It's more challenging to set up, and there is obviously a risk behind that things are changing constantly. So for us, it's been about prioritizing solutions that we know are completely remote and giving that sort of tool to someone at home, and also tapping into things like people are cooking more at home, and encouraging things that will actually help them in their new environment as well. So a little bit of it is sort of a product that fits the right time, but there is we've definitely invested in the platform and made sure there are more like tools and things that were making it more available to people, and giving them more of a community sense as well.
I will come back on kind of like the remote working, because we had a few interesting questions from the audience before. But David, thank you, Laura. I'd like to kind of talk to you about what you're seeing in terms of what's happening with our workforce in as a result of COVID. Like, are we okay mentally?
Yeah, it's a big question. I guess the short answer is no. And I suppose that one thing that is important to realize is that we weren't okay before either. This is not new information. People are amazingly resilient, right? They cope with just about anything, and they grow to face challenges like this one in ways that are really interesting. But there was never adequate support for mental health in corporate workforces, particularly, or in medical workforces, or in blue collar workforces. There has never been adequate support for mental health. It's been much better lately, and over the last 10 years, the changes have been amazing. But the amount of people trying to do something about it, not just BioBeats or Nell or the people in the school, but literally hundreds of companies trying to help. But no, I guess what I see is workforces that are incredibly strained, managers that don't understand how to help people doing tick boxing exercises. Even when they do needs analysis, they don't really listen to the results, and they're trying to just get through to the point where they can just say they put something in place. So don't mean to be pessimistic, but I guess the right answer is no, they're not okay.
I suppose it's like, with a lot of change, talking about preventative health, and we as humans, and this is something that I looked into when I was looking into kind of coaching, and when do people make a change, and actually quite a lot is when something really terrible happens, rather than necessarily something that's preventative. So I suppose now is an interesting moment in time where, well, we not everyone's affected, but we're faced with that, and I wonder how much that is going to impact individuals in terms of making changes themselves. We were talking before, actually, talk about how are companies dealing with, with this pandemic, and from a mental health perspective, like what are you seeing? Is there more investment, less investment, more thinking, or what's going on there?
So interestingly, I'm seeing less investment in some fields, and I'm seeing more in others. And weirdly, when we got acquired, we stopped working on corporate well-being for a while, because we were doing real-time monitoring systems, and it was different than a lot of people's approaches because we weren't pushing content alone. We were measuring the real-time effect of content on sleep quality, on circadian rhythm, on cardiovascular resilience, on heart rate variability, and on executive function in the brain. So there was a ton of data that was real time. And when we were acquired, these people that we were acquired by, Huma Therapeutics, were at the forefront of COVID tracking. So we started looking at Royal Brompton patients in Germany, just thousands of them, and using the tooling that we had to understand how their mental health was affected while suffering from COVID. And so I took my eye off the well-being industry for a bit while that was going on, and it's still obviously going on. But at the same time, the bit of deployment that we were doing in corporate workforces, there was a general sense of, well, this is a totally exceptional circumstance. I mean, we just have to, cope with the HR challenges, with the office challenges, with all of the nightmare that's going on. And I saw a lot of, so this is an unprecedented time. We need all hands on deck. We need people to work harder. We need, war spirit and that sort of thing, which made me really afraid, really scared for them, right? Because of thinking, no, this is exactly the wrong attitude. It's not, you don't want to work harder right now. You want to work smarter and understand, dig deeper into what people need. I mean, I don't have a brief answer to your question because it's such an open-ended idea of like, what are people doing? But I guess the simple answer is I see them investing less and being less smart than they were before about what it is that they deploy. Our solution was totally overkill in many ways. And people like Laura can tell you, like whenever you bring high-level testing into any place, there's massive reticence to they want to understand the privacy concerns. They want to understand it's like that reticence is already there. That's never gone away. But now there's other problems. I think managers and employees have totally different experiences of the pandemic. Men and women have totally different experiences of the pandemic and the corporate workforces. None of that is being acknowledged by anybody or talked about in any serious sense. Limeade produced an entire report on this that is really, I think, important. I tried to highlight in this. I tried to highlight that in the article I just wrote for Forbes on exactly that, on the differences between male and female perception of remote work experience in the pandemic. And Jeanne Meister wrote about this too, but there's massive disparities that weren't there before.
And what is the difference?
I'm so sorry, go ahead.
What is the difference? You're saying that men and women are experiencing different, when it comes to remote working, what differences are there?
So, I mean, just to go over some of them, if you look at the Limeade report, about 60% of male managers say that they feel extremely comfortable asking for time off to focus on their well-being, but only 25% of female managers do. Right. And that tells you a lot about what it is that they're coping, the demands placed on them, the expectations on women in the corporate world, the bars that they set themselves in terms of like when to ask for help. And then, some others, like, if you consider that only 11% of women have reported extremely positive well-being during the pandemic in this report, but 42% of men have.
And
right. So even when you look at the highlights of well-being, the disparity is huge.
And what do you think is the reason for this?
Well, if you go back a couple of years, actually more like 4, I guess, when we started to do real-time biometrics for mental health, we were working with a large insurance company, and one of their clients was an investment bank here in London. Well, I don't know where people are right now, but we were in London at the time. And this was a French bank in London during the Brexit vote, which was an amazing place to measure stress at during that time, because there was such uncertainty all of a sudden. And we put live sensors on them, and we found that they were more stressed when they went home than when they went to work. So literally they were okay during the day, massive stress sometimes, but there was attenuated. And then as soon as they started going home, their heart rate variability would go down, their heart rate would go up, their galvanic skin response were all over the place. And then they got really stressed out when they got home. And then eventually in the night, they sort of obviously went to sleep. And then as they went to work in the morning, their stress went down. And we couldn't figure it out and thought that it was an analysis problem, a hardware problem. And then we started looking deeper into the data, and we found that actually that was the case for most of them, because most of them had families. And when you talked to them about the responsibilities in families, the data in the female cohort versus the male cohort was completely skewed. So women who had families and were in that bank got more stressed going home to well over 60% higher levels than their male counterparts. And so that's never been new, right? This is not new data that Lymett's report highlights for the pandemic. It's just that the data that was already there, the things that were already happening then, are now worse because schools are closing at irregular, like unknown, it's an unknown variable when they're going to be open or closed. And because the sort of inequalities that were there before are sort of highlighted on top of responsibilities that already existed. So, so it's a bit of a nightmare. And there's a bunch of other statistics, but we probably don't have the time.
Do you think companies are recognizing this or not at all?
I think that not only are they not recognizing what's going on, but that what was already a set of well-known disparities in caregiving and in family support that were there during the pandemic is now being exacerbated by the fact that no one knows what's going to happen next. So the economic crisis is essentially looming all over them, so they don't feel like they can quit or complain or bring anything up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was already difficult to communicate this to managers who, by the way, if you look at the disparity between men and female managers, that's one thing that's interesting. But when you look at what managers perceive in the Limate report versus what employers perceive of what burnout there is in the company, managers already perceive that there's much lower burnout than employees perceive. So when you look at that perception problem plus the gender difference, it's almost impossible it's an impossible time to bring this up, basically. So no one's talking about it that I can see anyway.
I guess bringing that kind of vulnerability and expressing concerns and that ideal kind of building trust is so important, and yet that's exactly where we're moving away from. And how
yes,
what is a way to what can we do about it? We've got a lot of HR audience right now. What can they do?
Yeah, so I mean, I think systemic approaches like Nell Health's, for example, and approaches that understand that needs analysis are super important, like Ludo partnerships, are exactly what's needed. To bring people to the data level, to make them understand that stigma won't go away by talking about it, that stigma will only go away if we actually point a data finger at it and poke it and like really surface the data insights. That's probably the best thing that we could do, in my opinion. But there's also insidious foundational beliefs about work and the workplace that won't go away even if we show them that data. So if you think about it, so we've seen data whereby more than 70% of managers felt that they had a strong focus on well-being in the same organization where only 30% of people felt the same. That's a massive disparity. We're talking about 70 to 30%, right? And that discrepancy in leadership, and this is at a time when we know that leaders play an incredibly pivotal role in organizations, right? Where their behavior has significant impact on the work and the performance and well-being of their employees at the behavioral level. So at the leadership level, this isn't just a question of undoing stigma, but actually changing those core beliefs about what burnout is and what it looks like. This is what we tried to do, and we probably approached it from a complete overkill perspective because we were technology designers and AI people. And our mistake, I think, was to believe that a technology design is what's needed. And I realize I've just said that like we should look at the data and we should do needs analysis, right? But beyond that, there's a human problem, and that problem is philosophical. It's really not going to get better with data. I believe that really the leaders that are in these places, at least the ones that we've worked with, have a fundamental belief that people should work 18-hour days and should be available 24/7, and that is the case even more so now. And this is all because they're working towards an economic model in corporate culture that's focused on growth as opposed to abundance. And that is not going to change no matter how much data we give them. It's essentially a societal belief. It's not something we can change. That's a hard challenge.
That is difficult. I mean, but obviously you're the expert in kind of looking at the data and trying to use that to make a positive change in the world. But I wonder if there is a way to consistently highlight that actually, as a result of this, your company isn't being productive. It's not really getting the results, but it has to be on such a global scale for people to really admit that there is a problem. At the moment, what you're saying is like they're not admitting that their problem exists almost, or at least brushing it under the carpet, which is the stigma associated with mental health. So we're kind of still scratching the surface there.
Yeah, I'd say that's right.
And Elizabeth, just in terms of hearing all of this, like, what are your thoughts? I mean, are you recognizing these issues, and what do you think about that?
I hear from what David's saying, I don't entirely disagree, but equally I think that having line managers move to a different place of understanding it and seeing it differently is about culture work and really getting into authentic leadership. And authentic leadership might sound like a trendy buzzword, in the last year or two, but it is more important than ever that leaders are authentic. And actually, interestingly, even though we're all Zoom fatigued out and fed up with it, of being on a screen at home all the time, this has actually created and forced some leaders into being more authentic, because by the sheer nature of being on Zoom, you've got somebody's house behind you, you are into their life, their kid walks in, the cat walks across the screen. We've got this kind of authenticity of who people really are that's coming through, even for those people that might not have wanted it in the past. But all of this gets you to a point of culture shift. Now, it doesn't just happen like by osmosis. There is some real active work that needs to take place. And culture shift is, I love it. So, to see a shift in a culture, if you've got, an HR team and the right leaders that really want to take it forward. And, I think for lots of HR leaders, it's a real passion of how can we make the culture better here? How can we be more authentic? How can people really come to work and be their authentic self, which ties into the whole D&I agenda too? Then can we be in a place where those conversations can happen, where, as David said, well, I'm working 18-hour days, it's burning me out, I'm not feeling happy. We want that person to come forward, be heard, be listened to, and then for it to be recognized of how that is bad for business and not good. So it doesn't happen overnight, but it is a total culture piece of work to really shift people to see things in a different way and be authentically true, and try and remove that fear they're going to have of speaking up. And the more authentic you can be, the more likely you are to speak up and speak openly.
Actually, we have a really great question from Kelly Brogan, and she did say that she's okay to talk. So I'm going to bring her onto the panel, and if she doesn't want to, she doesn't have to. Otherwise, I'll ask a question on her behalf. So Kelly, if you'd like to ask your question, or hello, and please introduce yourself. Hi.
Hello. I've forgotten my question. So
you had a question. Well, if you were talking about how do you handle situations where leaders or managers are not talking or not taking well-being or employee mental health seriously.
Yeah, I suppose, there's and you, I think you've touched on this quite a bit over the last 45 minutes, but there's a varying, I guess, degree of acceptance over the value of promoting well-being, and personally I've come up against people who don't really take it seriously, who aren't embracing its value in particular this year. And that's a tough conversation to have. They may not be experiencing these issues themselves, and therefore don't see that as being valid or required to really address in other people. So I'm just interested, if there's any tools or ways in which you can address this sort of resistance within an organization, or even with specific people who feel that well-being isn't as serious as we all think it is, and not as valuable.
Sure. Do you want me to jump in, Maria?
Yeah, go for it.
I've had these conversations with line managers, and it is a process of coaching them to understand. So it's asking the questions of, can you tell me about a time when you felt incredibly stressed? What was that like for you? What was the impact on your day? And try and associate them into an experience for them, and then magnify it. And if you need the data to back it up, and then say, well, imagine if that was every day, and try, and that's what I mean by magnify it. What would that feel like for you? What do you think the impact might be in your team? So coach them through questioning to have them realize the impact. And then the data does back it up. So even if they say, well, it's a load of nonsense, I would have some data at hand that says, We know that employees who are stressed are underperforming. We know they are more unhappy. They're more unhappy. We know, and have that data available. It's out there. There's some incredible papers on it. And I think having that data, it also depends on the mindset of a line manager. If you know your line managers, I mean, I think about at Tapestry, I definitely had line managers that needed data. I had line managers that needed a conversation. So knowing what their style is of seeking evidence, and maybe even ask the question in that coaching question or questioning process of, what do you need to understand this better? Get them to tell you, and then support them in finding it.
I add quickly to that as well, because I think I really resonated a lot with Elizabeth's point on culture, and how, you know, sometimes when I'm speaking to company leaders or HR directors, and they're saying, well, we've done lots of these initiatives and they've never had much engagement, or they've never really worked, and you have to then say, well, why do you think that is? Because you can't, if you don't invest in a culture of trust with your employees, and you don't invest in them seeing that you're taking it seriously, how do you believe that they're then going to take up a solution and trust you that you're investing something in them? And you know, like David was saying, I think obviously slight bias, because I think health is something where data is an amazing tool, but it's also, you know, you have to sort of educate people into how amazing this data is, rather than just saying, hey, we've now invested in this solution, do you want it or not? I think there is a piece before that where, if somebody's not invested, it's like anything with leadership, you know, it does go down into a cultural either issue or benefit if somebody believes in it themselves. So I think there's definitely a cultural but also an educational piece there that will make a huge difference with the leadership team. Yeah, totally. And also, if you put a wellbeing idea in place, and then you don't follow it up and talk to your managers, it's a bit like you say, Laura, you know, it's not working. Well, is that because you just ran, you know, a 2-hour workshop on mindfulness, and then 2 weeks later you expect everybody to be working harder? Well, no, it isn't working. Of course it's not working. So it is that follow-up, and actually really integrating it and keeping the energy up, and having follow-up conversations and talking to people about its success.
We had another question, but this person just it's actually somebody from Farfetch, again, on the talent acquisition team, and actually, you know, talking about, you know, being people managers, you know, who are often the shock absorbers for the current times. What can, you know, she's asking, what can we do differently to also protect our own well-being to be as effective for our team? So obviously, you know, HR is the shock absorber for all of this. You know, what can they do? And thank you, Kelly.
Shall I jump on this one?
Yes, please.
I think that HR are in my 25-year career in HR, this is the most seismic shake-up I've ever seen in my life. And it's a very difficult time for HR, who are navigating potentially headcount reductions, budget cuts, really complex consultations. And so they are already suffering their own huge amount of stress through what they're dealing with. And then they also want to be there to support employees from a wellbeing perspective. So I think it's really important we look after the HR team through that journey, and set up, this is what I would encourage HR teams to do, set up a forum in which those teams can share with each other what's coming up for them. And whether that is let's have a conversation about our stress levels, whether it is giving them access to a resource that's going to help them de-stress. So your own inner well-being plan within the HR team, that by the sheer nature of them learning more and being able to express themselves will help them with the conversations with the line managers. But we've got to look after our HR teams at the moment. They're under massive pressure, and it's tough. It's really, really tough. Now isn't the moment for this, if it's what do I do now today? But just going back to my role at Tapestry, the whole team went through, and it was face-to-face then before this nightmaresville, a mental health training workshop to be trained as mental health first aiders, because it gave them the understanding of how to help and recognize the signs of somebody in the company who may be suffering from a mental health challenge, but equally it helped them equip them to recognize it within themselves. So just longer term, and it can be done remotely, I would really encourage HR teams to have their teams trained in that so they can look after themselves and others, because it's really important.
I guess to follow up on that, sorry, did I interrupt someone? Yeah, and just
no, please.
To follow up on that, what's the adverse effect that you're seeing of burnout to companies? And Elizabeth, that's to you again.
The adverse effect I'm seeing. Oh my
Or
God.
burnout, or just, when teams are not performing their best, or you can see they're under extreme amount of stress, things are going on. Like, how does it affect the business?
Well, that it's a drop in productivity. And I think, people are, when they're stressed, they're not performing as well. I think at the moment we have to manage how we use Zoom too, because what's happening at the minute in many businesses is people get on a call at 8 a.m. They go 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12. They don't break, they don't stop. So we've got to help people find gaps in their day. And whether it's booking in a Zoom meeting for 45 minutes, there's always 15 minutes, blocking out time in your diary for email time, doing a walking Zoom meeting. We don't have to be on video. Can you have it in your ear and walk the dog in the park at the same time? And giving permission for that. And that needs to be really overt. It needs to be the leader saying, if you want to walk your dog during this phone call, that's completely fine. Because by being overt, it starts building a culture of it being acceptable. And so I think we need to really help people in this stage when they're reaching burnout, of helping them, directly advising them on how to manage their days better. It's so important. And let's not forget, in many businesses at the minute where you've taken out, a percentage of the workforce, that work is probably got to go somewhere, depending on whether or not they're removing an entire department and that piece of work. So somebody else is probably picking up more work than they were before. So the burnout pressure is even greater.
And the thing is, you can't see it either sometimes, because if you're not physically present with someone, you're having to manage things remotely. And I think this is one of the key questions that comes up a lot. Like, how can we take care of our employees? How can we take care of our health when we can't really be so close to each other?
We need to guide our line managers to be having different types of conversations with this kind of management. And so when they're talking to somebody and saying, hi Maria, how are you getting with your work? What's been happening? They also say, how are you feeling? Really? And just by adding, because the person will probably say, because we're a bit like this as people, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm good. Really? Tell me a bit more. What are your pressure points right now? Ask really specific questions. So they have to give you an answer, not just, how are you? Good. What are your pressure points right now? What is a stretch for you at the minute? What is worrying you at night? What do you worry about when you go to sleep? And those kind of questions are not regular questions we ask face to face, but we really have to guide our line managers to be a lot more bold and ask those questions, because then you get what's going on underneath.
I mean, I think that's really, really important, actually. If I could just comment on Elizabeth's points, and there have been many that were important. So I won't trace back to her original comment that it's a culture thing, but it's hugely important. I mean, just to give you an indication of how important I think it is, the first HR manager that I liaised with was in Shenzhen in China, after a well-being meeting where they told us that their reaction to people committing suicide from their dorms was to install a net that caught them as they jumped. Wow. And I'm not making this up. This was like literally their reaction to suicide rates increasing right before Chinese New Year and the sort of like change in workforce, the traditional shift yearly. And from there to having corporate meetings with HR managers in banking in the UK, where I've literally heard people describe therapy as nonsense, as Elizabeth pointed out, and so on. It is absolutely crucial that it's a culture shift and that it isn't just a sort of exercise in data for data's sake. I think Elizabeth is absolutely right. And that last point that she made, if I could just comment on that, is that is even more important, because asking open-ended questions where we don't have any of the tools that evolution gave us to understand each other's suffering is uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. We used to be able to see each other. People hunch, they move differently when they're depressed. We did analysis on gait, on depression alone, and in relationship to dementia. People's gait and pitch and yaw and concentric angle change completely when they're overwhelmed, right? They become concentric, they get enclosed, right? It's what children do. So we don't change that from childhood. We just transport it to adulthood. And not knowing this, not seeing and have it in front of your eyes, doesn't give you any chances to say, hey, are you okay? Because you would say that out of gut instinct, because you see the physical changes in the person, and you're not able to see that in little boxes with just our face on them, right? And that thing that where people say, oh, I'm fine, that exchange that is so unequivocally part of English-speaking culture, where people just say, how are you? You're good, and you? Yeah, okay. And that's it. That's the entire encapsulated exchange. That is very difficult to break out of. It's absolutely insane to break out of it. In other cultures, if you ask somebody how they are, they will tell you. You could be there for half an hour, right? And we don't do that in corporate English speaking culture. So I think the points Elizabeth made are crucial.
I totally agree. I think, what I think she's saying is that, because we have to go against our almost instincts to be close from each other and to make it as part of our day to day, to really delve deeper into what really is going on and make it deliberate, to ask deliberate questions about that, because people don't necessarily want to open up because it's not a culture of being open, and that's the issue when it comes to the mental well-being. There was actually somebody who wanted to stay anonymous, but it's not really a question. I think it's more a statement. I think I know actually who it's from, but what they're saying is that everything you're saying is very informative, but trying to influence our CEO, MDs and directors is the difficult part. They all say it's very important, but in reality play lip service to employee wellness. And that's, when employees feel like that, that's challenging. It's like, what can we do? I know obviously you're talking about a seismic shift in our culture, but say for example you're an employee and you're the power dynamic is also really challenging. Like, how do you really get the leadership to see that this is really important and to actually go beyond lip service and do something about it?
But this is the thing. I'm sorry, may I? I don't know if anyone else wanted to comment on that.
Go ahead.
That's literally the thing that I feel most passionate about, is the idea that at the CEO level, you have functioning sociopaths at the best of times, right? And I speak for my own experience, and I'm sure it's not Laura's case, but there's just an enormous amount of sociopathic behavior in C-level people, right? And the only way that changes is when we make it absolutely necessary and mandatory and an accepted practice that everyone in managerial positions and at C-level should engage in therapy, should engage in vulnerability studies, in understanding how to progress, how to grow beyond the encapsulation we are given as children, especially if we're male, to never complain, never moan, always crack on, and never show weakness. We don't do away with that, nothing else will happen.
That's a very good point. I mean, Laura, in terms of like what advice can you give to companies in terms, obviously not from a mental health perspective, but what can they be doing to improve wellness and health and
I think no, I really again agree. It's a very, very agreeable panel. I think very important, and really, they're points that hit me home when you have a team, however many people working with you. I think you always feel it when you hear about the problems people are having, and you do want to think, how can I help? So I think one actionable thing, and actually it was at a company we're working with that I thought was really a really great initiative, is that they, the HR team there, they sort of did a massive company reach out, and rather than it being about particular solutions, they just said, we want to make sure everyone knows where to go if you have certain questions about certain things. And that sounds obvious, but people don't have an HR office to go to when they're feeling low, or I think now that's one of the bigger confusions. So I think having a really clear communication of, if you're not feeling okay, this is where you need to go. If you're feeling great but you have a question, this is where you need to go. And I think having that clear path for employees, but also sometimes it's not easy to go to your boss or your team, and having somebody, even having outside solutions which are, having great success now, like mental health platforms, or someone that is anonymous that you can just reach out to, I think is really important for companies to communicate and provide if they can. But I think there's also, there's also a big link between mental and physical health, and that's a challenge that everyone's trying to now navigate. And there are so many different links that you see in studies, but also in practicality. When you overinvest in one area, you have to also balance that with investment in the other. So if people invest very heavily into mental health solutions, it's important that off the back of that, they also give advice or make sure there is support for physical health, because they're so interlinked. And when you're feeling physically healthy and you're feeling like you're making progress and you are putting the work in to do right by your health, that will have a positive impact on your mental health and vice versa. So I think finding ways to have as much of a holistic way of managing wellness in the organization, and speaking out about it. There's been lots of mention of vulnerability, but I think that's so important now. And there's never been a time where people are more willing to accept vulnerability, I think, and actually wanting it from leaders, but also the people they're working around. And people you speak to now. I love David's sort of Englishism of how are you doing, and everyone says fine, how's the weather, grey. There's all these questions that I think now we should start saying, well, it is grey, but how are you really? And actually, and like, I think it's a time to challenge, and for employees, I hope who are watching, to feel empowered to actually say, no, I do want to make this a point, and I don't want our organization to have this culture, and I don't feel comfortable. And whether that's writing an email to a manager they feel comfortable writing to, or speaking to a colleague about it, I think it is a time to if you feel like you can have an impact, to try, and that probably sounds really sort of cheesy, but I think it is. I think managers are also a bit lost, and they don't know what to do often now, and I think it is about having that mutual trust of being able to say, I think you could be doing this a bit better, and not feeling like you're being accusatory, but actually you could be helping your manager or your culture of the company. So I think feeling like you can speak out, and feeling like companies at the moment need to be working together and trying to tackle those issues as best we can, knowing that it is challenging, and just adapting as humans do very well. But it's really interesting just hearing about the perspectives of the panel as well, and the power of the solutions that are out there. And I think I found it really useful hearing your perspectives as well in the conversation.
Thank you, Laura. Well, we're kind of running out of time, but just last question to you, Elizabeth. I mean, just in terms of what can companies do? Like, what should be the key priorities for wellness, well-being at work?
Conduct a needs analysis. Do it now. Do it first. And I think particularly with the world we are in right now, be nimble. Things are moving so fast. So you might conduct a needs analysis, you might write your well-being strategy and start executing it in January. You need to review it in February and March. I think we're moving so fast. Things are changing so much. What people need is changing a lot. And I also think a huge encouragement and shift and training on, and proper direct discussion on authentic leadership. It's so important. We have to be authentic leaders now. That is the way forward into 2021 for me.
I'm totally seeing that. I mean, when we used to be running physical events instead of having the online ones, but in terms of, who the successful leaders are when they speak about their teams, about how they handle those challenges, how they handle when people come to them. You can really
talk about feelings. When you talk about feelings,
tell the difference about how successful they are. Although, to David's point, yes, we are also surrounded by some that are extremely difficult to deal with. I mean, even case in point about the person who was stating that decided to stay anonymous, so they're clearly not comfortable with expressing their opinion. So that really goes.
It's because it's dangerous.
Yeah.
It is
People feel fear. That's okay. We just have to help them move through that. So
we all looking for solutions, and I think with Laura's business, her tackling this, the physical aspect, which also plays towards the mental health, because if you're feeling better in your body, you have something to look forward to. It's something playful and fun that you can, you're feeling great in yourself, and that kind of ties in. And likewise with David's business about doing incredible work of analyzing what's actually going on, but also him being not so positive about the situation, because he has to be, because there is a problem, and pushing that message so that something can be done about it. And Elizabeth, with you kind of tying all of that together and being in the thick of it, of actually making it happen for businesses. And for sure, nothing's perfect. We have to work with what we've got. And I think you're doing an incredible job of, actually making practical and actionable and, and real. And I think, you're all fantastic, and I really thank you for your time. And I had tons of questions, like literally, I'm just looking at my list, and we had questions from the audience. Also, I think we answered, but not maybe necessarily directly, but thank you to all of you who participated. I know not everyone likes to be on camera, but thank you for submitting your questions and for being here and being so attentive. And I'd love to continue these conversations. If you have any ideas, let me know. And yes, good luck to all of you with your respective businesses and what you're doing. I think it's helping the world and making it a better place. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day, and speak to you soon.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.